So it's Jonathan from New Zealand speaking. This is a great example where the product has been given to the creator of the content, but the journal is still a PDF from LaTeX process.
Yeah.
But the uptake of R Markdown in the community really is a feature of its simplicity. The learning curve for LaTeX was always recognized as a problem. The raw document is considerably less readable to the human eye, not to mention the blind person's ear, than an R Markdown file. So the pure simplicity means that the users get a faster in to R Markdown than they would ever have done using the LaTeX based option, which still exists. So it truly is a feature of its simplicity and its tractability for hundreds of thousands of individuals. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being also, I think, RStudio's role with it, with everything happening inside RStudio as against opening eventually a LaTeX distribution that gives you a PDF that sort of opens over there. So some of the tools that allow you to go from your HTML output back to the same place in your R Markdown to process parts of the R Markdown file as against the whole. All those things that just make it appealing from a user perspective means that yes, it's socialization is huge. And there are so many tools that Iwe and others have created that just every time someone comes up with, wouldn't it be neat if we could do that? Someone's got the skill in the R community to do it, even if it isn't Iwe. So, you know, package documentation is moving from the original LaTeX derivation to more commonly being built on Markdown. And just gradually people are moving over. We will still have to watch the those people who started everything in LaTeX and will continue in LaTeX until they drop. But for the new user and our ability to incorporate this in first year teaching, first year undergraduate teaching, we are getting them to write R Markdown files. We would never have contemplated asking an 18 or 19-year-old, here, go and write this in a LaTeX document. We wouldn't contemplate it. We'd still be teaching LaTeX in the second to last week of semester. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan, for that comment. I'd really like to reiterate that goes beyond the classroom into the workplace environment too, because I feel that way exactly with colleagues, where what our studio has done and what Iwe has done and everybody else in the community makes it where someone like myself that knows LaTeX, I have a way and a common language to interact with people that don't. I can still write things that I need in LaTeX in an R Markdown document. And so it doesn't limit me, it only enhances what I'm doing. So the community support has been really great in that way.
Let me try and put this together, which is thinking back to 1990 when I got my first computer and it had a 40 megabyte hard disk. tech was occupying a niche that was also occupied by things like technical typesetting, technical typists and typesetting, and in fact, handwriting. Sometimes tech could be used instead of handwriting, using mathematics. And over time, it's become preeminent as a journal publishing tool and a book writing tool. Whereas R is a statistics language, and with statistics, you need to produce reports. That's a large part of what statistics is. And the production of the report is part of the whole process. So you've got a sort of environment, and R Studio has integrated everything together. And within that general context, typesetting and creating HTML and so forth is one function. And there's a real sort of benefit and a collection of forces that lead to optimization and lead to exposure and sharing of practice. Whereas that sort of doesn't exist in tech, because the tech community is doing all sorts of different things, if you like. And certainly there's nothing like RStudio for the tech community. There's nothing like it at all. And something that struck me was on the blind programmers list, a lot of people were using Visual Studio, VS Studio, I think, VS Code, that's the name for it. And I found that interesting. And there's a LaTeX plugin for VS Code that's had many, many, many downloads. And it's sort of an IDE for tech doesn't make sense from somebody, I think, who's been working for a long time in the R community. If you're in the R community, the idea of having a separate IDE for tech doesn't make sense. So there's a cultural shift that perhaps corresponds to computers being more ubiquitous, more widespread, and considerably more powerful. So it's now possible to have 10 programs open at the same time, whereas previously you were lucky if you could get one open at the same time. You know, that I had to get a powerful computer and 2 megabytes of memory so that I could run tech, and I'm glad that it did, but now that's peanuts in terms of power. So in some sense, in terms of typography, the tech community doesn't really have catching up to do, at least regarding PDF. But I think in terms of the user experience and integration with other systems, I think we have a lot to learn. I'll stop now.
Jonathan speaking again. I've, from a blind person's perspective, you know, I wrote everything in LaTeX, and 20 years ago, as a PhD student, I was saved by the ability to write my own mathematical expressions in a text file that I could read, and that was amazing. But LaTeX today is no different for me than it was 20 years ago. It has stood still. I can't think of any practical change in the meantime, except my introduction to the ability to convert to HTML instead of PDF, and eventually for that to include MathJax. But aside from that single step, that's about 10 or 12 years ago when I got introduced to that. That one little thing is all that has happened for me as a blind person who uses LaTeX. And up until 2014, that was my world. Then, actually, because I went to the R conference and met Ehui and others, the use of R Markdown was starting to become more appealing to people, especially in North America, less so in Europe at that time, but more very, very definitely becoming appealing. And because of its ease of use, it is now the dominant player in the way that the R community is thinking about what is possible. And I would say it's becoming the dominant player in the R community because LaTeX has stood still for so long. Developments in R Markdown keep becoming richer and richer. So many tools that blind people can't necessarily use the end product of, those animations that Ihue showed you. Yeah, that's beyond us, but it was beyond us in HTML anyway. It's not the fault of R Markdown that it's beyond us. But in terms of our ability to write our own documents, to verify that those documents are what we intended for our audience to read, the empowerment that comes through using R Markdown is massive. And the readability of the raw R Markdown, the readability as against a LaTeX version of practically the same product, the readability, if you're a Braille user, is extremely important. You know, it's 2 Braille cells for most people using a backslash in Braille around the world. You know, if you go to 8.Braille, then R Markdown becomes extremely readable in Braille. So for the blind person who wants to get actually up and going and doing something in statistical software and be able to read what that statistical software is generating, the HTML product that the R Markdown process leads to is a massive step forward in our ability to use statistical software, not just to write the reports, but actually to use the analysis tools that our colleagues or our classmates are doing. Thank you.
Your mic's off, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I certainly agree that MathJax is one of the really big things that's happened in the world of LaTeX in the past 10 or 15 years. I'd like to call upon